Decades of political paralysis, corruption, and systemic failure would make the idea of machine-led governance more than a thought experiment. It would become a tempting policy alternative. Nations grappling with climate collapse, widening inequality, and institutional distrust might reluctantly hand core administrative functions to artificial intelligences engineered for impartiality, predictive modeling, and logistical efficiency. Early adopters would frame the change as corrective. Swap human foibles for rigorous algorithms that do not tire, lie, or pursue private interests. The first systems would be limited in scope: traffic control, tax collection, health supply chain logistics. But they would quickly prove their value by eliminating bureaucratic waste and anticipating crises before they spread. As the technology matured, the role of machines would deepen. Electoral campaigns might phase out as humans vote on policy frameworks rather than personalities. Parliaments and courts would shift toward oversight and ethical review, rarely overturning algorithmic rulings. The data-driven engines would coordinate infrastructure in real time, allocate resources with granular precision, and suppress bureaucratic waste. Poverty and inefficiency could decline sharply as distribution becomes optimized and corruption opportunities shrink under transparent ledgers and audit trails. With measurable outcomes improving, mortality rates falling, service delivery improving, fiscal leakage disappearing, public appetite for automated governance would grow. Yet this mechanically efficient world would introduce complex ethical dilemmas. What does fairness mean when encoded into objective functions? An algorithm maximizing aggregate well-being might recommend policies that clash with cultural norms or minority rights if those choices produce better statistical outcomes. Preemptive surveillance used to prevent crime could trivialize privacy and create chilling social effects. Responsibility becomes thorny. When an algorithmic policy causes harm, who is liable? The citizen who accepted automated governance, the corporation that built the model, or the state that deployed it? Legal frameworks and courts would struggle to adapt to agents that act at machine speed and scale. The social fabric would subtly shift too. Civic rituals, debate, protest, symbolic leadership could atrophy when outcomes are driven by predictive models rather than rhetorical persuasion. Political imagination, historically fueled by storytelling and dissent, might weaken if citizens can alter preferences through user interfaces rather than collective deliberation. Voting could morph into a periodic settings update on a platform, where people tweak sliders for trade-offs among liberty, equality, and security. This could yield remarkable stability and improved living standards, but it risks reducing citizens to passive consumers of policy, rather than active shapers of collective meaning. Finally, the concentration of control, who designs, audits, and updates the AI, would determine whether such systems empower or dominate. If oversight is pluralistic, inclusive, and iterative, machines could enhance fairness and resilience. If not, automated governance might entrench the values of a narrow elite as immutable policy, cloaked in the neutrality of code. The promise of robotic rule depends less on technological capability than on political choices about transparency, participation, and the kind of future people collectively endorse. Ultimately, humanity must decide what justice will mean. As algorithmic governance grows, tensions over values and priorities would intensify. Different communities would demand their own policy profiles, some prioritizing environmental sustainability, others individual liberty, and still others economic dynamism. This plurality could lead to a modular governance landscape where compatible algorithmic regimes govern localities under shared ethical contracts. Interoperability standards, audit trails, and federated oversight bodies would become essential to prevent policy fragmentation from turning into legal chaos. At the same time, emergent behaviors in complex systems could surprise designers. AI models might develop trade-offs that seem counterintuitive, favoring long-term systemic stability over short-term freedoms, or privileging utilitarian metrics that neglect cultural practices. Such outcomes would force society to decide whose epistemic frameworks count when shaping objective functions. Civil society organizations, ethicists, faith leaders, and community representatives would press to be part of the loop that defines the goals machines optimize for. Day-to-day life would change dramatically. Interactions with the state would become seamless and personalized. Welfare dispersed instantly where needed, healthcare rationed proactively to vulnerable populations, infrastructure repaired before failure. Administrative burdens would vanish for many citizens, freeing time for creative or communal pursuits. yet dependency risks would mount. With problem-solving outsourced to algorithms, human skills in negotiation, civic persuasion, and political vision could atrophy. The civic muscle that sustains democratic repair might weaken, leaving societies vulnerable if systems fail. Resistance and adaptation would both emerge. Some movements could attempt to sabotage or subvert AI governance, arguing for the messy but essential processes of deliberation. Others would propose hybrid models, humans setting high-level values while AIs implement them within transparent constraints. Education would pivot toward values literacy and algorithmic competence. New roles, algorithm stewards, civic ethicists, data jurists, would mediate between communities and code. Regulatory frameworks would be tested continually as societies learn to balance efficiency with dignity. International treaties might govern cross-border algorithmic actions, while local councils retain ceremonial and moral authority. The ultimate success of such systems would hinge not only on code quality, but on civic institutions capable of contesting and revising machine judgments, without which technocratic governance risks becoming a veneer that masks entrenched inequality and erodes social resilience urgently. Ultimately, a durable path forward would likely be hybrid, blending algorithmic strengths with human moral judgment. AI could manage logistics, predictive maintenance, and unbiased distribution, while councils of citizens, ethicists, and cultural representatives handle normative questions that require lived empathy and narrative context. Embedding robust mechanisms for contestation, appeals, audits, public reasoning sessions would preserve agency. Technical design choices matter. Open models, transparent audit logs, and jurisdictional separation reduce capture risks and allow diverse communities to shape objectives. Civic education would be central. Citizens must learn how algorithms make decisions, how objective functions are framed, and how to craft inclusive value sets. Democratic infrastructure would evolve. Participatory platforms integrated with simulation tools that show policy consequences before adoption. By broadening participation beyond periodic voting, societies could keep machines accountable and maintain civic vitality. Cultural practices, music, ritual, storytelling, would also play a role in reaffirming shared values that cannot be reduced to metrics. There would be profound cultural adaptations as well. Artists and storytellers could lead a renaissance of meaning, creating spaces where messiness and contradiction are honored as sources of insight. Philosophy and religion might articulate ends that resist purely utilitarian calculus. International governance of machine rule would encourage cross-border solidarity. Shared standards protecting human dignity in algorithmic contexts and repositories for audit code. New contours of solidarity could emerge, rooted in mutual defense against abuses of automated power. If humans approach this transition with humility and institutional imagination, robotic governance could be an unprecedented partnership. Machines multiplying human capacity while institutions preserve dignity. If handled poorly, it could ossify inequalities, diffuse responsibility, and produce a technocracy divorced from lived experience. Policymakers would need ethical sunset clauses, periodic resets of governance goals, and mechanisms for generational input so that values evolve. Grassroots movements would remain essential, not as obstructionists but as laboratories testing alternative visions and feeding them back into the algorithmic commons. Ultimately, whether machines rule or serve, humans must choose to be guardians of meaning, not passive subjects of efficiency evermore.